My name is Stephen Niss, and I'm the writer-director on the film Rear View.
My name is John Klein. I was the cinematographer on Rear View, and Steve and I and Caitlin and Ward and Timmy, I've worked with all of them on prior projects to this, so we have a really good rapport with each other.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Creedon. Sorry, this is Bella. She saw a dog downstairs. And I was the production designer on Rear View.
I'm Ward Crockett. I was the editor, and then also I was script supervisor. And I've worked with these guys a lot.
And personal advisor, and just like the person keeping us all calm on set. That's Ward.
My name is Timmy Barron. I'm in this movie. I played the dad. Forget his name.
Miles. You play Miles.
Miles. Of course, Miles. It's been a while. I played Miles.
Hi, I'm Bella, and I played the role Madison, the daughter.
Nailed it, Bella.
Hi,
She
Bella.
actually remembered her character's name. So I think like the smallest seed of the project came from a masterclass that I went to with Paul Schrader, who's the writer of Taxi Driver and writer-director of First Reformed most recently. And he talked about his writing process, mentioning that the thing that always worked for him was to figure out what his like deepest seated fear was at the time, and then write that. So figure out what your fear is. Are you feeling lonely, isolated, but what is really the core of that fear? So it took me several months to like figure out what my fear was. My wife, I believe, was pregnant at the time with our first son when I went to the master class. And so after my first son was born, I started thinking more and more, and like there's the surfacey sort of fear, like I'm afraid for my wife to die, or I'm afraid for my son to die, or God forbid for me to miss all of this, right? But when I like dug deeper, I realized the deepest part of that fear was that like my wife and I, we were raising this baby together, like we were a team, and I was terrified of what that would look like if she was just gone the next day. How am I going to do this alone? Like I can barely keep my head straight just with somebody helping me out. And I would just lose my mind if I was doing this alone. So that's kind of where it started from. And like you mentioned, I wanted the kid to be older. This sort of age 6 to age 7 range is kind of when death, the concept of death, starts to become more of a permanent thought. And so I wanted there to be that discussion. How do you explain death to somebody who doesn't yet really understand what that means? And then beyond that, when you're dealing with one child and your spouse passes away, how do you have the space to grieve if you have to be focused on this kid? Like where does the time come for you to deal with the grief that you feel, the anxiety? Where does that time, where does that energy come from? So that's sort of a long-winded answer to where the inspiration came from. I adjunct teach the occasional class, and I'm always telling my directing classes that when it comes to casting child actors, just as much as casting them, you're also casting their parents, because some parents are going to want to direct for you, right? Some parents are going to want to kind of feed those lines to their kids. And we got really lucky. So like Bella's audition was awesome. Timmy was the only actor in the cast that didn't have to audition for the role because he and I had this previous working relationship. So I was also very lucky by Timmy being there at the audition. So we were able to see kind of that chemistry as he read with possible mom actresses, possible kids. And so we got super lucky with Bella. Like her audition was awesome. And you aren't really able to know what their parents are going to be like that much within the audition room. But Maria was a godsend. Like she was, if we needed her to be hands-off, she was hands-off, and we didn't have to tell her. Like she just knew that. If we needed a little help coaxing a certain feeling or emotion out, she was right there to help us out with that. So we got super lucky with Maria being as helpful as she was.
Kind of backstage, we all just hang out and like had fun, make jokes, and like Yeah.
I think lots of funny jokes. And I think, you know, to credit with this cast, I say I'm so forever grateful because the first acting experience for her was so supportive for her, and they were just fantastic. I mean, if she needed a moment, there was a scene that was really, really difficult, and it was, let's stop for a second, and I kind of just had to be with her and reassure her. But otherwise, credit to the cast and crew because everyone made her feel so welcome, so supportive, and she was just having a blast and learning and joking with everyone. And I think she walked away with lots of jokes and like inside jokes with everyone that just, you know, whether it was raising eyebrows, I know it was all sorts of little things with everyone that just made it really special for her. And just making sure there was a lot of balance and a lot of credit to the cast and crew because everything was so appropriate. Everyone watched their language around her, making sure everything was just perfect. So, I mean, as a parent, it was a wonderful environment and one that, you know, you never know what you're walking into. So, you know, I love this cast and crew for that.
I wanted to add just another, Maria was amazing. One example of that was we were doing one particular scene. This was Bella. Bella was incredible. But we're doing a particular scene where Bella she comes in the middle of the night and crawls into bed with me. And, you know, that's when I decide what we're going to do next. And I remember at that time, the story or the reality of what is happening, I think was hitting Bella at the time. And what was so great about Maria was between takes where it seems like Bella was a little hesitant or you know, things were becoming a little real. Maria was so great at explaining to me what was going on, which really helped me because, you know, you got a scene where your daughter is calling into bed with you. It's, you know, very, very beautiful. And the last thing I want to do is make anybody uncomfortable doing that in that situation, that particular situation. And Maria was just so great at explaining to me what Bella was going through, which was making me feel more comfortable that, you know, I can just continue to play the scene, play the character without really being distracted or worried about the fact that, you know, making Bella uncomfortable in that particular scene. So kudos again to Maria. She was incredible on set and just even stepping in those moments to help explain to me what Bella was going through to make that scene just a lot more comfortable for me as well.
Yes. So Steve and I sort of discussed the obvious thing, which is, you know, how do you make the flashbacks versus the present day scenes? How do you distinguish them? But how do you also not make it something that's like overly cliche, like sepia tone flashbacks or things like that? And we obviously wanted the flashbacks to be more vibrant. But one way we kind of tackled that was we switched lenses. So we shot all the flashbacks in anamorphic to give it more of like kind of a cinematic, almost dreamlike kind of feel. Because just the different lens flares and the different sort of out of focus elements, because it gave us sort of a different life to those images than the present, which we shot on very clean, very spherical lenses, a lot of static compositions. I think all the flashbacks we shot handheld, because we wanted that kind of, you know, vivacity to everything. And for the present day stuff, everything is either tripod or dolly, and really like sort of almost claustrophobic compositions at times. We wanted to have this, like you said, I feel like our goal was always to make sure that the visuals heightened the emotional core of what the characters were going through. And there was also an element of trying to show that there is a shift that occurs over the course of the movie. I think like at the start of the movie, everything's very cold and kind of desaturated and sad. And by the time we go through the flashbacks and go through their time in the park and end at the park, which was like 2 blocks away from me, which is great. It was a very easy day. But then by the time we get there, it's all of those colors kind of mixed together. You have the sunset, you have the cooler colors, you have green and the foliage. It feels like there's sort of this melding of, you know, this is a sad time, but things will be okay, and this family will work through this together. So there was definitely a goal of building to that through the idea that, well, eventually this story becomes Madison's story. It is Miles' story, but it really is also how Madison is dealing with grief. And we realize, man, she's actually dealing with this maybe in a more healthy way than her father is. And she's going to be able to help him through this, which visually, I think we tried to kind of get at that to some degree.
You know, kind of what you said earlier, communication with this group is just so great. I've worked with both Steve and John multiple times before, and Steve as a director is very easy to talk to, very easy to, you know, work things through. We went to the location a couple times before we started actual pre-production, you know, when I went in and started doing the production design work. So being able to see the space and get a feel for what we were working with was extremely helpful. We had 3 fantastic locations, 2 of which I didn't even need to touch, which as a production designer is like fantastic. And so the house that we filmed at, I had some wonderful DePaul students help me with the setup and everything, and getting everything really nice and beautiful, especially for Madison's room, which was a lot of fun.
You built that room from scratch, basically. Like everything that was in that room, you basically brought in.
Yeah. We my pretty much everything from my niece, which was fun, and some things of Steve's wife, the horse stables and all that. So just really channeling my inner 6 to 8 year old, which for me is a lot of fun always. And, you know, we didn't have to change the colors of the walls or anything like that by talking with John and seeing what his plan was. You know, everything just really worked, and it all fell into place so wonderfully. And yeah, just working also at Starved Rock in the park was just breathtaking. Those places are so beautiful, especially Starved Rock. I joked multiple times because we were there in October, November time. It's like, oh yeah, I came here 25 years ago. I planted all these trees. I was ahead of but yeah, for that, I really just had to focus on wardrobe, which was nice. It was kind of a nice, refreshing change to be able to focus on something else and really see the actors shine. It was a lot of fun.
Well, I think too, what's cool about that from a low budget, like when you're working on a low budget film, I think there's you sometimes when you're watching a low budget film, you feel like, oh, well, they just like used whatever was in front of them. You know, the actors wore their own clothes and things like that. But I mean, realistically, the amount of choices that you have to make to get, you know, the right jackets for Timmy and Bella, to show like the distinctions between them, you know, and to show how he sort of blends into the color scheme, and she stands out. She's her mom's kid, you know. So like they just the choices that Caitlin was able to make on those fronts, I was always really impressed with. When you're working with a low budget movie, but you're still finding those ways that you can unify like the whole thing.
I think it's another thing that on indie films, you can do all the sort of pre-production, all the prep work possible, and you still need luck at the end of the day. So John and I had a lot of these conversations about color playing a big role in this. And the Starved Rock scenes, the present day and the flashbacks, they're shot in back-to-back days. We pushed the color a little bit, but we just got super lucky that on the day that we were shooting the flashback scenes, it was sunny, it was beautiful, slightly chilly, but still really pretty day. And then the next day, it had stormed overnight, and it was leaves everywhere. It was darker, it was cooler. And it just really worked for the aesthetic. So I had told John ahead of time that there were 2 sort of visual themes of autumn in the woods that I'd be happy with, which is like lots of light flares, lots of vibrant colors. And then the other is when you're walking through the forest and it just feels like it's raining leaves everywhere you go. It just never stops. And we got those 2 aesthetics in back-to-back days through no effort of our own beyond just luck. And as soon as we pretty much called cut on the last shot of the second day that we were there. It started raining, and it rained the entire next day. So we just got very lucky with how we had scheduled that.
That second day when the leaves started falling, oh my God, like it was praise be. It was incredible.
It was, yeah, no, like I distinctly remember because we were setting up where, this like canyon, that we're in. And as we start like rolling on one of the scenes, like as we're pulling the camera back, and suddenly you hear it coming before you see it. And just like this sprinkling and dappling of all of the, is like, you
started
can't
to be able to predict in the canyon that if we heard the breeze, the leaves would show up about 10 to 15 seconds later. So we waited for minutes until we hear the breeze, and then, okay, action, go, 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 go.
The serendipity that goes into indie low budget filmmaking it's a mixture of like, okay, we planned for this aesthetic and this look and this style, and we made as many choices as we were able to make given our budget. And then we just sort of took advantage at the right times, hoping that this would happen.
One of the things that I think is a big testament to Steve's vision and foresight and talent on this was that he was also planning for the edit, like in pre-production. Like he and I had conversations about how the flashbacks were going to work, and on set, we were consulting about, so if we shoot the park scenes like this, like what shots, should we get? And he was, he was like asking me, do you want this kind of shot, or do you want a different kind of shot? So these flashbacks cut together in a certain way, which was a really different and great experience for me as an editor, because I'm like, oh, cool, I have kind of a say and in kind of planning how the edit is going to work. So that was really cool. It makes it feel very collaborative, and just sort of another great example of how much fun it is to work with this crew. We did a fair number of takes, and we got a lot of coverage, and that made it a lot easier in one way, so that I had a lot of choices, which was great. So I think that makes it simpler when you can say, well, this read of the joke doesn't quite match up with this reaction, so you can kind of you can try out different combinations. So I think that again it speaks to these guys like talent in getting a lot of takes, getting good coverage, and Steve's directing of the talent to really sort of shape and sculpt and get some variety, so that there are those choices that exist.
There was an interesting scene I remember, like from when we shot it to what it looked like in the edit, was when you the car, like when they're going to the park, and there used to be a whole dialogue scene, really.
That was about a 4-page dialogue scene.
Yeah, in the car, and that got cut down to, I think it's like 30 seconds in the movie, and it's a lot of silence. It's a lot of like silent beats. Like,
yeah, that was a really interesting. Steve and I played with that scene a lot, probably more than any other scene, I think. And I think we would send it to some people for feedback, and some people felt like that scene ran long.
Well, yeah, and it had Timmy being a father, right? And we weren't ready at that point for him to be a good father. We still wanted him to be kind of this removed, distant figure.
Yeah, it's just a good example of how you can cut something and everything else works better for it.
Collaboration is huge in film, right? Like I don't think it makes sense to hire people that you trust if you're not going to actually trust them. So I trust Ward completely with an edit in pretty much every way. And a big part of that was in the final flashback where all three of them are playing together. We went into it without that scene really scripted at all. We wanted it to feel as energetic, as vibrant as anything in the movie. So we basically strapped a camera to John's shoulder and sort of said, okay, you're going to be playing hide and seek, and then Timmy's going to run after you and do whatever you want. He'll follow you with a camera. we did it, what, 4 or 5 takes probably, John, until your arm fell off. And
I think I basically like at some point collapsed halfway through a take, and I think that was like, okay, we've shot enough. But it was also, I remember it was raining that day, so like that last flashback, which is really bright, sunny day in the park playing hide and seek, and it's totally raining.
So it's like 5 long takes of a very nebulous scene that doesn't have a ton of structure within it, and I'm just giving it to Ward, like, okay, Ward, make sense out of this. You know kind of where we are in the movie. Make it look amazing.
We talked a little bit about in that scene, like this Terrence Malick kind of approach. Like, let's just shoot things that don't like necessarily, they aren't story driven so much as they're like a feeling. Like there's points at which like Steve would say, like, well, let's just throw the camera up in like pan up into the trees and spin around, and it's okay if you lose focus, and it's okay, like there's again like an emotional quality that feels like I'm running through the park, like it feels like you're getting that sensation.
When we had the initial edit, it was working, like it sort of worked, but something was still missing, and one of the takes that we had done was slow motion, and we weren't using any of that footage, so Ward and I worked together with like, okay, well, how can we get this into this? How do we have this make sense? And I think you sent me an edit of that scene at like 2 a.m. one morning, and I watched it, and for the first time having watched something in it, all of a sudden like tears are streaming down my face. I'm like, this is it. Like this is exactly the whole aesthetic of the movie. This makes sense out of the entire story. And I was laying in bed watching it next to my sleeping wife. I'm like, I don't know if I should wake her. So I waited. She gets up around like 7 a.m. I'm like, okay, before you get out of bed, you have to watch this. And I showed it to her, and then she's crying, and it was, that's why you trust people to deliver on this vision that you have at the end of the day.
Yeah, I remember the hiking scene. It was very fun because I don't really go hiking a lot, so it was like a very fun experience just hanging out with people, and yeah, it was awesome.
It's also great that that's the scene she says, because that's also the scene where all of us are lugging like 20 pounds of equipment with us on this hike to make it look great.
Well, because there are 2 different levels. Like there's the hiking part of it where we were doing the hike by the fence and things like that, and then there's the bench was on like the lake that's there at Starved Rock. But in order to get to that bench, you had to go down like 6 flights of stairs, and then we had to lug all the gear back up those stairs.
Yeah, it was easy to get it down.
Yeah, getting down was fine, but then the end of that day, and then of course it started raining at the end of our last day. It was like, oh man, what a day! But it was also really fun and gorgeous, so it worked out.
Well, let me preface it with this. All my scenes with Bella were very tough, not because of Bella, but because of the state my character is in. So definitely my favorite day of shooting, or the most fun for me, was that first day at Starved Rock, where basically we're shooting all the flashbacks. So all the dates I'm having with who's going to be my wife, and then the mother of our child. And so I think it's the first flashback where we're on our first date and we're walking there. That was at the beginning of the day. And what was great about working with Steve was his letting us go off script or just kind of improvise and just play around with it. You know, what would it be like on a first date? And I absolutely loved working in that way. So that was super fun. And of course, Callie is also a fantastically talented actress. So working with her on that first date was probably that was my favorite scene to shoot. It was just super fun and super to do. Hey, you little cutes. You want to watch some TV? Okay. And what was so great about that first day as well was, I don't know if anybody mentioned this yet, but we stayed at a cabin. Or I guess it was a cabin, it was a house cabin type thing. We all stayed together over that weekend, which was very unique to this process because we all really got to know each other. So that first day of doing the flashbacks was super fun. And then coming with the cast and crew and hanging out that night was also super fun. And then it was shooting of the really heavy stuff with Bella and the relationship between Miles and his daughter. And so, and it was colder that day. So yeah, that first day of shooting at Starved Rock that was definitely my favorite. And the main reason is because Miles was happy.
I loved a moment when we were all staying together that first night. Timmy, Una was born by that point, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I remember looking around the room, and I was FaceTiming with my wife and my 1-year-old. John was FaceTiming with his kids, and Timmy was FaceTiming with his baby, and all of us are just on the phone with our kids, knowing we're going to shoot this film the next day. And it felt very much like, yeah, we're all in this together. We all have this shared experience.
I was talking to my cats on there.
Yeah, sorry, I left you out. Yeah, the cats. That was the one question I was waiting for at my initial talkback when we had our first screening, and nobody asked it. And I'm like, this is the thing I want to talk about. No, a lot of what you said is on point. Rear view is very much, we wanted the flashback aspect. We wanted the rear view mirror when we're in the car. And we wanted like a physical representation of rear view, right? But what the title means to me and why it started to work more and more and more and more to me is that anytime we experience tragedy or grief or big moments in our life, it is very much like a rear view mirror to me, in that we have one thing to do, which is continue to live on with our lives and move on and move forward, but it remains in the rear view mirror, getting smaller and smaller and smaller, but it's still always going to be there. All right. So anytime that we have a tragic moment in our life, it becomes a part of us. We can overcome that. Absolutely, we can overcome that. But it's still a part of what makes us us and what makes us unique as people. So that sort of is where rear view really started to work for me, where I realized that like objects in the mirror may be closer than they appear. Yeah, any of these things can sort of rear their ugly head. That's what post-traumatic stress is. But the more we move forward, the smaller they become, but they're always going to be there.